Great. So, just to follow up on something that Doug said, that I actually have changed what programming languages I use most commonly now because of the training aspect that Doug mentioned. So I used to use a language that I really liked, but it was more obscure. But there was Clojure, which there's not a lot of training data, and the code that it produces is not great. But Python, it does a much better job. So it's actually like started to do reinforcement of me. And so like I'm changing and learning different things and interacting differently because of it.
We did joke that we don't like students to cheat exposure.
Exactly. Because they'll really have to understand what it's producing, and it will make mistakes. So let's see here. Okay, so you've seen some of this, so I'm probably skip through some of the initial pieces pretty quickly. But prompts are the inputs that we give to ChatGPT. So all of these statements that we give it. And patterns in prompts are all about basically, I'm going to steal what Shiro said, because it's, I've heard Shiro say it multiple times, and it finally clicked and got through to me. My learning style was a little slower, but what we needed to be teaching is problem solving. And in really software patterns have been a thing for a long time, teaching students, if you have this particular problem that you're trying to solve in software design, this is a pattern or an architecture you can use to solve it. And it also came from the world of physical architecture. You can design a building in this way to solve this type of problem. And I think we're going to end up with the same thing in large language models. And maybe we'll get to the place where they're so good at what they do that we won't have to think about this. But I think for a while, at least, hopefully until my career ends, we still have to be intimately involved in the problem solving piece. And so the way to think about prompting is we need to know how to produce the right prompts to solve the problem that we're trying to solve. And so a prompt pattern is basically a design for a prompt to solve a particular problem. So I'm going to take one example for to get started with this, which is one of the ones that you see used most often, which is the persona pattern. So this is basically whenever you see somebody say, act as the example that Jesse gave, which is I have one that I've done in a demo before where I say, act as a computer that's a victim of a cyber attack. And when I type in commands, you produce the output that computer would produce. And, miraculously, it can very effectively simulate the contents, the interior workings of a computer that's had an attacker go in and change things and do malicious things. Or you can say, act as a financial planner and give me advice on something. But the key thing about this pattern, and I think one of the things that's so powerful about it is and a good one to illustrate prompt patterns is that I don't have to know what the output should look like. I don't have to know what are the important things to put in the output if I use this pattern. I just have to know who I would ask. So I can tap into knowledge that I don't have as long as I know who I would get the knowledge from or what I would get the knowledge from. And that's what's so sort of powerful about this pattern. So I can say, act as a computer that's a victim of a cyber attack, and I can go and interact with it and learn stuff. And that demo, is something I want to give to my class in the future, because I think a lot of them could go and learn things that they don't know just simply by interacting with it and exploring it. Now, for my demo of this pattern, I wanted to come up with something that I didn't know that much about, so that I am not an expert on, but one that I could verify. As Doug said, trust but verify. So my wife is a speech language pathologist. She works for the school system. And what she does is test children before they come into the school system to see if they have any speech language issues that would require an individualized education plan. And so I went to ChatGPT and I said, act as a speech pathologist or speech language pathologist. I'm going to tell you what a 3-year-old said, and you will write an assessment for me. And I tried to channel what my son sounded like at 3, and I'm not sure if this was accurate, but I thought I would give ChatGPT a challenge. So I said, the child said, I need way woy. And ChatGPT said, well, first off, it knew what the output should look like. It started writing something that looked like a report that a speech language pathologist might produce. And it said, here's the child's speech sample, I need way woy, and here's the assessment. And says a bunch of interesting things, but I'm going to jump down to this consonant errors things because this is pretty interesting. Well, actually, before I do that, I'll say, it says, It appears that the child may be experiencing some phonological and articulation errors, which are common in children around this age. I would not be able to ask ChatGPT, analyze the phonological and articulation errors in this speech sample. I wouldn't have known what to do, but if I have the pattern, I can use it to get something that I want out of it. And then it goes deeper and it says, consonant errors. It seems that the child is having difficulty with production of some consonant sounds, specifically the N and L sounds. The child said me instead of need and woy instead of toy, assuming the intended words were need and toy. So this also just shows you some kind of phenomenal capability of this, is that not only is it going in and looking at the words, but it's not saying I'm supposed to spell correct them. It's saying I'm supposed to interpret them as a speech language pathologist. So if I just pasted that in, it might spell correct it and rewrite the sentence. But if I go in and I say act as a speech language pathologist, suddenly it tells me what's wrong with the language itself and what I should know about that child. And then syllable structure. The child's production of the word way may indicate some difficulty with correct syllable structure, which suggests a substitution of the initial consonant cluster PL with a single consonant W. This could be an example of a simplification. I wouldn't have known how to ask for that, but if I have the right pattern, I can get that output. And so we can get things that are beyond our understanding of the domain if we have these types of patterns, or we can get all kinds of other interesting behavior out of the models. So when I showed this to my wife, she found it very irritating because it was in the morning. She was getting ready to go. It sounds like I'm telling her that she's going to be replaced by a machine. She doesn't like this. So she said, that's all ridiculous. If I had a 3-year-old that said this, I would be telling the parents, look, don't worry about it. That's probably something that's just going to go away with time. And then I said, yes, but look, ChatGPT said the same thing. And at the end, it said, considering the child's age, it is important to remember that some speech sound errors are developmentally appropriate and may resolve on their own with time. And I said, see, and she walked out the door and went to work. So it's just not there yet. So, but I think the patterns piece is certainly important. But I think the other part that gets missed, especially when you look at the news, is everybody goes and they said, I said this to ChatGPT, and this, terrible answer came out of it, or this flawed answer came out of it, or, whatever it is. And people are sort of looking at it as a one-off thing, and that completely loses the whole conversation piece of it. And so the way I think about this is, imagine that, Michelangelo had gone up to a piece of stone and hit it really hard with the hammer, and it didn't look like the David. And so he threw the hammer on the ground and said, this is a terrible hammer. It's so flawed. It didn't produce a great sculpture. And so a lot of what we see in people discussing it is still looking at it in that perspective of I should be able to hit it once and get what I want, rather than it's a tool that I use to iterate and refine and mold and sculpt. So one of the most important things is sort of that interactive back and forth conversation piece, which I think when we were having the discussion on the panel about the importance of maybe seeing how students do the conversation piece and see like Shiro said, the problem solving, I think that's where, the human really becomes important, is how they react and interact with the tool in order to shape the output. So to come up with an example of this, I thought I would pick a task that a human, if they tried to do this on their own, or if I asked a single human to do this, it'd be really hard. So I said, please create a meal plan for my family that is based on a fusion of food from Ethiopia and Uzbekistan. I want to eat keto and up to 2,000 calories per day. Pick dishes where the ingredients are easy to get from an average US grocery store. So I think this would be really hard to solve this. And I don't think I could do it quickly. I don't think you could Google it easily. So I thought, well, let's see what ChatGPT does with this. And ChatGPT instantaneously says, here's a sample meal plan that combines flavors from Ethiopia and Uzbekistan while also being keto friendly and within a 2,000 calorie per day limit. And it says breakfast, scrambled eggs with sauteed onions, tomatoes, and Ethiopian berber spice mix. And then it has this nice little in parentheses where it says made with chili powder, paprika, garlic powder, ginger, cumin, and coriander. And I know what it's telling me. It's telling me you can find this in the grocery store. Do not worry. And serve with a side of sliced avocado, and then lunch, Uzbek style lamb kebabs. So it's given me now something that's Ethiopian. It's got Uzbek lamb kebabs. It looks like fairly keto, since I was keto for a while. and it's got spices that I can get. But I looked at it and also said, but it's not perfect, right? Because it doesn't tell me how much to eat. And I had this 2000, calorie per day limit. And that, I have to know how much to eat if this is actually going to work. So I said, can you take it and give me an approximate serving size? So rather than just saying, oh, it didn't give you, that's ridiculous. This is not 2000 calories. I said, okay, well, let's refine it. And so I said, you give me the serving size? And it says, sure. And then it comes back and it reshapes what it's done. And it says, you're going to have for breakfast 2 eggs, half cup onions, half cup tomatoes, 1 teaspoon of Berber spice mix. And so by interacting with it, I'm improving the output rather than just saying it's not what I want, and I'm iterating on it. And it looks fairly reasonable to me. Now, I haven't pasted it in or calculated the calories, but it looks reasonable enough to me. And if there was an issue, I could probably go and keep reshaping and interacting with it and getting smarter about how I prompted it in order to improve the meal plan. But I thought, I'm going to continue the conversation. I'm going to think about how can I keep this thread going? And I thought, well, I have a 9-year-old and I'm not sure he's going to be excited about these dishes. So maybe I can come up with a way of making him excited about the dishes. So I said, my son is 9. Sometimes he won't try new dishes. To make this culinary adventure more fun for him, can you create a short Pokemon battle story to go with each dish? I'll read the stories with him before dinner to get him excited about trying the new food. Make sure the story ends with a cliffhanger that will motivate him to try the food. And this comes out of my, with everything with ChatGPT, my answer now is like, could I also do this? And the answer is almost always yes. And so I thought, well, can it also do this? And the answer is yes. And I couldn't do this. There's no way I could do this. And so it's a story, Pikachu and his friends were exploring the wilds of Ethiopia when they were suddenly ambushed by a group of sneaky Pokemon thieves. And it goes on and it says there's this Berber dragon, which we can remember was one of the spices in that first dish. And then it ends with the cliffhanger. Can you help Pikachu and his friends defeat the Berber dragon and enjoy this spicy breakfast? It's maybe not the best cliffhanger ever. Could I probably go and improve it through some interaction? I think I could, but it's already a lot better. And I don't, the meal plan's hard enough. Getting Pokemon stories to go with the meal plan's really, kind of amazing, but it also shows you the power of this sort of conversational interface where we can take something and we can continue to shape it and add to it and enhance its value to us over time. Then I thought, well, what else do I do at dinner with my 9-year-old? And so we talk a lot about, what he did at school, what he's learning. And I thought, well, one of the things he loves is math games. He loves to play math on the iPad. I thought, well, maybe I can get ChatGPT to create a math game for him that we could play at dinner. And there's a question, a discussion earlier, can you have it ask you questions? And the answer is yes, with the right pattern, you can have the flipped interaction pattern. So I would like you to play a math game with my 9-year-old to teach him about division with fractions and nutrition. Ask him questions one at a time involving Pokemon and these topics and make it into a game. When he wins, the Pokemon win. Ask the first question. And ChatGPT says, great, let's play a fun math game involving Pokemon and nutrition. Pikachu and his friends are planning a meal that includes half a cup of cooked rice, but they need to divide it evenly among 3 Pokemon. How much rice will each Pokemon get? And it gives him a hint. And it says, if you get stuck, feel free to ask for more hints. And then it just waits. And you get to type in the answer. So now it's asking you questions. So if you type in 1/6, then it will respond by saying, good job, that's correct. So we can certainly ask it questions and refine the output, but then we can at any time we can switch over and say, have it elicit knowledge from us and give us feedback on the information that we're giving it. And so if you put in 1/6, it says, good job. It tells you that that's right. Shows the work for the math, which, my son who's 9 loves to get the answer. He hates to show the work. Now he sees that even ChatGPT shows the work too. Maybe not always, but sometimes, and maybe that's not always right. And then it gives the next question at the bottom and you could keep going. And then I thought, well, at dinner, I don't really necessarily want to have ChatGPT open. It'd be nice if I could turn this into a real piece of software that I could run outside of ChatGPT. So can I lift this product and move it to a new context? So I said, let's create code for this in Python. But I want it to be a web application. And then I started injecting some of my computer science knowledge, and I told it some of the requirements that I wanted to turn this game into an actual piece of software. And of course, ChatGPT answers yes, and then starts generating code, which I don't have all of it here. But the great thing about it is it runs and it gives the game. We have the exact same game we had before. And now we've got a math game. So I think that, the goal of this is really not to show you any particular example, but to show you that the importance of continuing the conversation and iterating on the outputs that it's giving you to continue to reshape, to add to it, because that's the real power of where it comes in, is not just give it something, get an answer, but get a building block, build a little more, and figuring out the right ways to incrementally create, something that would have been very, very difficult to do any other way. And if you could do it another way and you could do it better, then by all means, go do it that other way. Pick all these things that there's no way you could have done it before, and build things that you couldn't have done before. And that's when you really start to see, the capabilities of the tool. All right, thank you. And we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Jules didn't tell you was his wife was not CEO yet in Uzbekistan. If he was, she really doesn't stop.
Yeah.
And there's questions, raise your hand. Bring the mic. Yeah, mic.
So if this question is kind of for both of you. If Dr. Schmidt is right about how widespread the use of this is going to be, and you're right about your anecdote at the beginning about changing your programming languages, I got to wonder what effects we'll see on how people interact just between each other from their interactions with ChatGPT. Like, are we going to start seeing people structuring their own interpersonal conversations after prompt patterns, for instance?
So a couple of thoughts on this. First of all, we all have that annoying friend who's really smart in something like math or chemistry and thinks they're smart in everything. And when you ask them a question, if you straighten their core competency, they give you the same confident, rapid answer that's completely wrong. First of all, ChatGPT is like that. But what do we do? They're our friends. We learn to work around their limitations. So I think one of the things that's going to happen is people are hopefully going to be a lot more skeptical of the answers they get back, which is probably good for a whole bunch of reasons. Why we shouldn't believe that Abraham Lincoln said, "Don't trust everything you read on the internet." So that's one thing. The other thing I find personally is when I go interact with more traditional modalities to getting help, like Google search, I'm trying to have a conversation, and Google search is like, "Go away, he just wants keywords." And so I think that's going to change the way we interact with stuff, because we've trained ourselves to be kind of precise when we talk to computers, because they don't really understand things very well. And now we don't have to do that. And moreover, going back to the point before about everybody being a programmer, everybody will be a programmer. It's just some of us will decide to be more structured in the language we choose. But everybody's going to learn how to interact with computers. And I think that's going to have really interesting effects, especially for people who are currently left out of most social interactions, thinking of older people. This is going to give them a whole new way to interact and have fun and have a button. So you combine that with robotics, and oh my God, it's going to revolutionize things like.
So I think it's maybe an initial thing is like, for me, ChatGPT has become like you walk up to somebody you don't know and you're like, well, it's sunny outside today. And you're like, yes, it is. And now you can say, well, what do you think about ChatGPT? And there's either like, oh, it's crazy, or they're like, what's ChatGPT? And then I'm like off to the races, right? So it's now like right now it's like this, and I think for a while it's going to be this conversation piece of like, I said this to ChatGPT and it said this, and then it's going to become like social media maybe. I think the other thing is like, what happens when we are using ChatGPT as our intermediaries for conversation? So I had this discussion with a lawyer, and he said, so ChatGPT could start reading all of my emails and just already creating draft responses for me. So I could just hit send. And oh, that would take so much of my burden off. And then he thought for a moment and he said, but wait, everybody else is going to do that too. So I'm not going to have any savings at all. I'm just going to have, there's going to be like this back and forth, like ping pong of like ChatGPT. And I said, I don't know how to answer that one. I don't know what's going to happen, but that'll be interesting to see what happens. So I think there's going to be, unintended, things that happen that we can't predict yet.
I love that we Regarding the prompt engineering, so the example you gave about, kind of fine tuning it to get to an understanding that it can give you more of a exact answer. So you have to say, act as a speech pathologist. At what point can you give it information and it infer, like what kind of layer would someone have to build to say like, oh, it's a question about speech pathology, and I'm going to take on that persona because that is your intent. And by virtue of quantum engineering, you can get it to give you something better. But what layer would someone have to build on top of it, or what other kind of training would have to make that leap by itself?
That's a great question. I mean, I think right now you have to get to the point where questions become so specific that if I go back to the root, like if you think of it, like it was trained on text to learn to predict patterns, I think you have to get back to some series of words or things that create this like attention that has shifted the context in some fundamental way, that like I now answer this in a completely different way or using a completely different set of patterns than I would have before. So I think right now you have to get into you need some like language from that. Now, my guess is that when you say act as, you're somehow triggering those patterns. My guess as to how it's doing that. And so I think you could probably get to the same place if you could get the right, sort of trigger words there that are sort of equivalent. Maybe, I don't know. I think that's an interesting question. I don't know how this works, right? Why does act as work so effectively? I don't know.
Jumping off that point, how do you deal with situations where when you're engineering your prompts that in, for example, different fields, the same word might have different meaning, or they might use different words to refer to the same concept. So how do you, with a lot of science being interdisciplinary, how do you sort of take that into context when you're actually designing the prompts that you will use?
So I think one way is you tell it. And so I have, it's too far in the slides to try to get to, but I have more slides past this for another talk. But so you can basically tell ChatGPT the semantics of the language you're going to use. So you can say, for example, whenever I write A, right arrow B, I'm talking about graphs, and A right arrow B means A and B are nodes and they're connected in a graph. And then you can go in your next prompt, you can write like, FGH, right arrow, ESB, ESB, right arrow, library or something else. And you could create a whole graph and describe it. And then you can ask it questions about the graph. Now, if you take that same thing and then you like try to ask it a propositional logic question after you've done that, it'll answer it wrong because it'll assume that's probably you're trying to have graph notation. So sometimes you have to explain to it, when I say this, this is what I mean. So like if I'm doing A arrow B, I'm using propositional logic, and that should be the interpretation, which might be slightly different from the graph. Where if I'm doing A arrow B, I'm using a graph interpretation of it. And so sometimes you have to add that additional, anchoring context to make sure it has the right interpretation of what you're doing.
And also you can mix, as we discussed, you can mix the different prompt patterns. So you can actually start with you are an electrical engineer.
Yeah.
All right, now it's the context and then everything you say makes sense from the context.
One of the things I think is so powerful is the ridiculously low barrier to entry to find this stuff out. And the fact that you can try it a bunch of different times and maybe you don't get it right the first time with the Michelangelo sculpture analogy, but you could very quickly converge. And I also find out as I get more practical with it, I'm getting better at anticipating how to ask questions. And I'm also getting much better at knowing when it's a waste of time to keep going. So there are times when it just won't give you the answer no matter what you do. You're probably going down a path that it just doesn't understand. And you're better off like going back and Googling it the old fashioned way, or you're better off trying to rephrase the whole problem in some different language.
And then the way that you ask and the way you prompt is always going to be shifting. It shifts between different models and it shifts as the models change. For example, the introduction of plugins is going to change how you ask and what you should ask as well. So it's a moving target. We're always moving.
Then I guess my last question was, is this still like applicable for like unsolved problems where you've looked in other contexts but haven't found a solution, versus for other ones, for example, when you're teaching in class, it might be more clear because it's more in its reference data set versus potentially extrapolating to like generate a solution to this general posed question, so to speak.
I think it's good at mixing existing information. And if you can mix existing information to get the answer, then it's pretty good at it. So if you, the closest example I can give is like if I say, one of ones I've said is like, what would the world look like without odd numbers? It can give you a good answer to that question. But like the information, like it just has to go and look at where all the places their odd numbers are used. But if you said like, invent like a math, a new math that doesn't use odd numbers, I don't think it can do that. So we're safe for a little while
But
longer.
it would probably try.
Yeah, it would try and get it and fool you.
So maybe this is a question more for Doug, but I was going to ask, are there any either difficulties or pathologies you find with students interacting with GPT? And I was going to suggest that, introverts may not like typing to GPT. Then I was thinking, maybe extroverts don't want to interact with GPT. So they keep their interactions short and don't get to a solution you may like. So I don't know how that variety is.
Experience seeing how the students will use this just in a couple of weeks. I do find it oftentimes, but this is not uncharacteristic of people doing things the old fashioned way. Google, where you go look this up on the internet, blah, blah, blah. And they say, I can't find it. And you go search it, you find it right away. So I like this prompt engineering, it's getting people to the point where they can get the information you need from it. And also, again, realize that just because it tells you something doesn't mean it's right. And so I think that is probably the greatest skill you can teach anybody in modern worlds. You have to double check everything because every source has a bias, whether they know it or not, right? That's a good lesson to learn. And I hope more people will realize that because with the cybersecurity threats that we're about to face, you have to take everything with a degree of skepticism. Even if it sounds like your mom, right? It's not your mom. But it's not.
So one question I had is related to the fact of how to convert text into images or even video. So for example, we have protocols for doing certain experiments. And one way to do this then is to have the students stand in the lab and take a movie of them, and attach that to the protocol. But could we use a protocol to actually generate an animation of this process to then have a video that we could attach to the protocol, but a computer animated video?
So before you could kind of hack this where you could tell it to generate an output that you can feed into like this tool. So like you could say GraphViz is a tool that you can, has a textual input format and it will produce a graph, like draw it. And so you used to be able to say like, produce this, produce an output in GraphViz that would visualize this and it would do it. Because it's basically like coding for it. So, but it's coding in GraphViz where you could say produce, the other thing you could do is you could say like produce a DALL-E input to visualize that, concept. So you would have it generate the explanation and then generate the input that you would give to DALL-E to try to get DALL-E to generate it. I think Microsoft was the one that released a tool, and maybe it's in Bing now where it just does it as part of the tool now. So you can say, do this and it will generate the description, and then in the appropriate place, kind of like now it will generate a description and then code, it will generate a description and then imagery using external tools. Or with the plugins, you can do things like that too, where you have it, generate the description and then it calls out to the plugin to some other tool to actually render the image for it. Now the video production or animation production tools probably aren't as good yet, but I think I'm just waiting, right? So until Netflix is no longer like, there's not a limit, right, to that series I like. I just go next episode. And dynamically it generates the new video and I keep watching and then I'm like, oh my gosh, it's 1 a.m. I have to go to bed. And then like, I realize, it's 1 a.m. 3 days later, right? Because I just got sucked in.
The best part of that is all those series that you got hooked on and got canceled. Right? Now you'll be able to watch the follow on. You can come up with a new ending, Game of Thrones.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Netflix series are so similar.
Yeah,
There's a lot of creativity.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so you talked earlier, you're talking about everybody being a coder now, or programmer. So, and you alluded to this earlier about getting better at it, like how, and I don't know if this is prompt engineering or just practice, but like how important was it exactly how you were phrasing those questions with like the cuisine and the recipes, like, and is there a way to teach that, or is that just something where you kind of just got to practice to get a little bit better? Because it seemed, I couldn't quite tell, but it seemed like you kind of, there was a rhythm or a pattern to how you were doing that. I don't know if you can talk to that a little bit.
So there's definitely use of some of the patterns in there. So like the quiz one, to get it to ask the questions and to ask them one at a time. There's some specific phrasing that goes in. And so it's like, it's just teaching the patterns. Like if you want it to do this, like this is how you should phrase it, like kind of phrase, and these are the statements that need to be in there. So for our, sort of our patterns work, it's all about that. So let me see if I can go back real quick. One of the most important things that I did in this example here for the pattern is like, you can get it to ask you questions, but if you want it to have that truly like one at a time style, like a really powerful way to do it is just to say, ask the first question. And then that will more reliably, I'm not saying 100%, because a lot of this stuff is like, doesn't always work, but that will pretty reliably turn it on to one question at a time. Now you can always say, ask me questions, and it'll just like, sometimes it'll ask you one, and so, and then keep going as you answer them. And sometimes it'll ask you all 10 at once. But if you say like, ask the first question, then it's like one question and then you go back. The other thing is like the game. That game is a powerful keyword. Like the moment that you kind of like, say game and question together, you start getting that interactive like style. So some of it, you just kind of have to know these patterns. There's also a paper out where, and I can't remember who did it, but somebody analyzed, and there's some hope for computer scientists yet, but they analyzed programmers prompting versus like people that don't have programming experience. And programmers were much more effective at prompting.
And the summer will be certainly good prompting clinics and then experimenting with all of those iterative patterns. So there'll be a lot of opportunity over the summer to get better and better. The AI summer, which your very first that is going to be prompt engineering, and then the second week is often that I love it. It's going to be AI prompting for programming AI. Let's go and take one more question, and then we'll have a bit of a break, and then we'll head downstairs for our section. Yes.
Yeah, my question was for the professor that just left, but maybe you can.
I'll act as Doug Schneck.
You were Doug Schneck.
Okay, all right, sounds good. But maybe you can answer it. He had talked about cybersecurity, and so is the concern that how would you proof certain information from being used by some of these tools, or the creation of new tools that are designed to specifically take this information? I work in healthcare, so patient data being a prime example.
So I mean, I think huge percentage of cyber attacks actually start from a human mistake, right? Trick a human into doing the wrong thing. So if you think about like, if you're an attacker who English is not your first language, and you're trying to trick people into doing the wrong thing, right? You broadcast at large scale, as realistic as possible communication to try to hope that you'll get a couple of hits where people do the wrong thing. Your hit rate's probably really low. You rely on a large volume. And so the defenders detect you because you're having to operate at a large volume with kind of like maybe not the best grammar, or you have other mistakes in your language that tip you off. Now you have a tool where you can generate something that's indistinguishable, from a native speaker, and you can act as, I can act as VUIT at Vanderbilt and generate an email that would be sent to everybody at Vanderbilt and ask them to take some type of action. And so suddenly you can have probably a lot smaller volume, much higher hit rate, and trick people into doing things. So that's one thing. The coding ability is really good. So you say, okay, I have this system over here. I know it's vulnerable to this. Go and write code that can exploit that vulnerability. And so you could very quickly have highly customized attacks. So I think all of the things that, the way it's a productivity multiplier for written communication that is very effective and convincing. It's also a productivity multiplier for the attacker. The way it's a productivity multiplier for a programmer to write better code faster. Same thing for an attacker who wants to write something. But on the other flip side of it, as a defender, like I can write more code to, I can go maybe fix systems faster at scale. I can make sure that it's easier to migrate systems to the latest version and to rewrite. A lot of what we get stuck with is it's hard to upgrade systems. So you write it and for a developer to go and rewrite everything. But now if we have AI tools that can just go rewrite it when we discover the flaw and we can stay up to date, I think there's potential on both sides. So I think on the flaws on the software side, I bet what happens is that it's kind of like even. I think we'll have attackers maybe exploit more stuff, but we'll also have capabilities to defend. I think on the communication side, I think we'll have to get more careful about how we decide on what's authentic or not. So maybe we have to look more carefully at how we verify the source of things in communication. So every time you send an email, it's being like cryptographically signed through some hardware physical world token that you have or something like that to make sure it's authentic. I think those types of things are going to become more important. Well, I guess the other thing too is if we are all using ChatGPT to write our emails and respond to each other at some point,
At some point, we can just step away from the.
if my prompts are better, it will detect that your prompt is malicious and that'll be okay.
Thank you very much, Jules.